the Western Wall, Wailing Wall or Kotel Hebrew, translit, HaKotel HaMa aravi, Ashkenazic pronunciation, HaKosel HaMa arova, Arabic, translit, Ait al-Buraq, translate, the Buraq Wall, or Arabic, al-Mabk, the place of weeping, is an ancient limestone wall in the Old City of Jerusalem. It is a relatively small segment of a far longer ancient retaining wall, known also in its entirety as the Western Wall. The Western Wall is considered holy due to its connection to the Temple Mount. Because of the status quo policy, the wall is the holiest place where Jews are permitted to pray, though it is not the holiest site in the Jewish faith, which lies behind it. The original, natural and irregular-shaped Temple Mount was gradually extended to allow for an ever larger temple compound to be built at its top. This process was finalized by Herod, who enclosed the mount with an almost rectangular set of retaining walls, built to support extensive substructures and earth fills needed to give the natural hill a geometrically regular shape. On top of this box-like structure, Herod built a vast paved esplanade which surrounded the temple. Of the four retaining walls, the western one is considered to be closest to the former temple, which makes it the most sacred site recognized by Judaism outside the former Temple Mount Esplanade. The very large stone blocks of the lower courses are Herodian. The courses of medium-sized stones above them were added during the Umayyad era, while the small stones of the uppermost courses are of more recent date, especially from the Ottoman period. The term Western Wall and its variations are mostly used in a narrow sense for the section traditionally used by Jews for prayer, and it has also been called the Wailing Wall, referring to the practice of Jews weeping at the site over the destruction of the temples. During the period of Christian-Roman rule over Jerusalem, ca. 324 to 638, Jews were completely barred from Jerusalem except to attend Tisha B'Av, the day of national mourning for the temples, and on this day the Jews would weep at their holy places. The term Wailing Wall was thus almost exclusively used by Christians, and was revived in the period of non-Jewish control between the establishment of British rule in 1920 and the Six-Day War in 1967. The term Wailing Wall is not used by Jews, and increasingly not by many others who consider it derogatory. In a broader sense, Western Wall can refer to the entire 488-meter-long, 1,601 feet, retaining wall on the western side of the Temple Mount. The classic portion now faces a large plaza in the Jewish quarter, near the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount, while the rest of the wall is concealed behind structures in the Muslim quarter, with the small exception of a 25 feet, 8 meters, section, the so-called Little Western Wall. The segment of the western retaining wall traditionally used for Jewish liturgy, known as the Western Wall, derives its particular importance to it having never been fully obscured by medieval buildings, and displaying much more of the original Herodian stonework than the Little Western Wall. In religious terms, the Little Western Wall is presumed to be even closer to the Holy of Holies and thus to the presence of God, Shechina, and the underground Warren's Gate, which has been out of reach since the 12th century. Even more so, the wall has been a site for Jewish prayer and pilgrimage for centuries. The earliest source mentioning this specific site as a place of worship is from the 16th century. The previous sites used by Jews for mourning the destruction of the temple, during periods when access to the city was prohibited to them, lay to the east, on the Mount of Olives and in the Kidron Valley below it. From the mid-19th century onwards, attempts to purchase rights to the wall and its immediate area were made by various Jews, but none was successful. With the rise of the Zionist movement in the early 20th century, the wall became a source of friction between the Jewish and Muslim communities, the latter being worried that the wall could be used to further Jewish claims to the Temple Mount and thus Jerusalem. During this period, outbreaks of violence at the foot of the wall became commonplace, with a particularly deadly riot in 1929 in which 133 Jews were killed and 339 injured. After the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the eastern portion of Jerusalem was occupied by Jordan. Under Jordanian control, Jews were completely expelled from the Old City including the Jewish quarter, and Jews were barred from entering the Old City for 19 years, effectively banning Jewish prayer at the site of the Western Wall. This period ended on June 10, 1967, when Israel gained control of the site following the Six-Day War. 3 days after establishing control over the Western Wall site, the Moroccan quarter was bulldozed by Israeli authorities to create space for what is now the Western Wall Plaza. Etymology Early Jewish texts referred to a western wall of the temple, but there is doubt whether the texts were referring to the outer, retaining wall called today the Western Wall, or to the western wall of the actual temple. The earliest Jewish use of the Hebrew term HaKotel HaMa aravi, the Western Wall, as referring to the wall visible today, was by the 11th century poet Ahimaaz ben Paltiel. The name Wailing Wall, and descriptions such as Wailing Place, appeared regularly in English literature during the 19th century. The name Mer des Lamentations was used in French and Klage in German. This term itself was a translation of the Arabic el-Mabk, or place of weeping, the traditional Arabic term for the wall. This description stemmed from the Jewish practice of coming to the site to mourn and bemoan the destruction of the temple. At some time in the 19th century, the Arabs began referring to the wall as the Buraq Wall. This was based on the tradition that inside the wall was the place where Muhammad tethered his miraculous winged steed, Buraq. The tradition on which this is based only states that the prophet, or the angel Gabriel, tethered the steed at the gate of the mosque, meaning, at the gate of the Temple Mount. The location of the entry gate identified as the one used by Muhammad varied throughout the centuries, from the eastern and southern walls, to the southwest corner, and finally at the western wall, and specifically at Barclays Gate immediately adjacent to the wailing place of the Jews. Israeli archaeologist Meir Ben-Dov concluded that the Muslim association with Western Wall began in the late 19th century in response to renewed Jewish identification with the site. Location and dimensions The Western Wall commonly refers to a 187-foot, 57 meters, exposed section of ancient wall situated on the western flank of the Temple Mount. This section faces a large plaza and is set aside for prayer. In its entirety, however, the above-ground portion of the Western Wall stretches for 1,600 feet, 488 meters, most of which is hidden behind residential structures built along its length. Other revealed sections include the southern part of the wall, which measures approximately 80 meters, 262 feet, and another much shorter section known as the Little Western Wall, which is located close to the Iron Gate. The wall functions as a retaining wall, supporting and enclosing the ample substructures built by Herod the Great around 19 BCE. Herod's project was to create an artificial extension to the small quasi-natural plateau on which the first and second temples stood, transforming it into the almost rectangular, wide expanse of the Temple Mount visible today. At the Western Wall Plaza, the total height of the wall from its foundation is estimated at 105 feet, 32 meters, with the exposed section standing approximately 62 feet, 19 meters, high. The wall consists of 45 stone courses, 28 of them above ground and 17 underground. The first 7 visible layers are from the Herodian period. This section of wall is built from enormous Mabk limestone blocks, possibly quarried at either Zedekiah's cave situated under the Muslim quarter of the Old City or at Ramat Shlomo 4 kilometers, 2.5 miles, northwest of the Old City. Most of them weigh between 2 and 8 short tons, 1.8 and 7.3 t each, but others weigh even more, with one extraordinary stone located slightly north of Wilson's Arch measuring 13 meters, 43 feet, and weighing approximately 517 tons, 570 short tons. Each of these ashlars is framed by fine chiseled borders. The margins themselves measure between 5 and 20 centimeters, 2 and 8 in, wide, with their depth measuring 1.5 centimeters, 0.59 in. In the Herodian period, the upper 10 meters, 33 feet, of wall were 1 meter, 39 in, thick and served as the outer wall of the double colonnade of the temple platform. This upper section was decorated with pilasters, the remainder of which were destroyed when the Byzantines reconquered Jerusalem from the Persians in 628. The next 4 courses, consisting of smaller plainly dressed stones, date from the Umayyad period, Muslim, 8th century. Above that are 16-17 courses of small stones from the Mamluk period, Muslim, 13th-16th century, and later. The well-known story that the top layers of the wall were added by Sir Moses Montefiore is unsubstantiated. Accessibility people with disabilities The plaza and wall are accessible to wheelchairs and people with mobility difficulties via either the Dung Gate or Jaffa Gate. Access directly from the Jewish quarter of the Old City is via a considerable number of steep steps. Access for cars is very restricted, and parking is a nightmare, so disabled visitors are advised to arrive by taxi or public transportation. Guide dogs are permitted. Transgender individuals In January 2015, a transgender Jewish woman, K. Long, was denied access to the wall, first by the women's section and then by the men's section. Long's presence was prevented by modesty police at women's section who are not associated with the rabbi of the Western Wall or the site administration. They are a group of female volunteers who guard the entrance to the women's section, preventing entry to visitors who are not dressed to their idea of orthodox modesty standards for women. The director of Jerusalem's Open House, a community center for the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community, noted that Long's experience was not unique. Gender separation at the Western Wall is harmful for transgender people. This is not the first story that we know of with transgender religious people that wanted to go to the Western Wall and pray and couldn't, said Eleanor Seedy, who expects that the battle for access to the Western Wall for the LGBTQ community will be a long and difficult one. It was later asserted that K. Long would have been permitted in the women's section except for her clothing. It was not an issue of her gender, but the way she was dressed. History construction 19 BCE According to the Hebrew Bible, Solomon's temple was built atop what is known as the Temple Mount in the 10th century BCE and destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and the second temple completed and dedicated in 516 BCE. Around 19 BCE, Herod the Great began a massive expansion project on the Temple Mount. In addition to fully rebuilding and enlarging the temple, he artificially expanded the platform on which it stood, doubling it in size. Today's Western Wall formed part of the retaining perimeter wall of this platform. In 2011, Israeli archaeologists announced the surprising discovery of Roman coins minted well after Herod's death, found under the foundation stones of the wall. The excavators came upon the coins inside a ritual bath that predates Herod's building project, which was filled in to create an even base for the wall and was located under its southern section. This seems to indicate that Herod did not finish building the entire wall by the time of his death in 04 BCE. The find confirms the description by historian Josephus Flavius, which states that construction was finished only during the reign of King Agrippa II, Herod's great-grandson. Given Josephus' information, the surprise mainly regarded the fact that an unfinished retaining wall in this area could also mean that at least parts of the splendid royal stoa and the monumental staircase leading up to it could not have been completed during Herod's lifetime. Also surprising was the fact that the usually very thorough Herodian builders had cut corners by filling in the ritual bath, rather than placing the foundation course directly onto the much firmer bedrock. Some scholars are doubtful of the interpretation and have offered alternative explanations, such as, for example, later repair work. Herod's temple was destroyed by the Romans, along with the rest of Jerusalem, in 70 CE, during the First Jewish-Roman War. Roman Empire and rise of Christianity 100-500 CE In the early centuries of the Common Era, after the Roman defeat of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, Jews were banned from Jerusalem. There is some evidence that Roman emperors in the 2nd and 3rd centuries did permit them to visit the city to worship on the Mount of Olives and sometimes on the Temple Mount itself. When the empire became Christian under Constantine I, they were given permission to enter the city once a year, on the 9th day of the month of Av, to lament the loss of the temple at the wall. The Bordeaux Pilgrim, written in 333 CE, suggests that it was probably to the perforated stone or the rock of Moriah, to which the Jews come every year and anoint it, bewail themselves with groans, rend their garments, and so depart. This was because an imperial decree from Rome barred Jews from living in Jerusalem. Just once per year they were permitted to return and bitterly grieve about the fate of their people. Comparable accounts survive, including those by the Church Father, Gregory of Nazianzus, and by Jerome in his commentary to Zephaniah written in 392 CE. In the 4th century, Christian sources reveal that the Jews encountered great difficulty in buying the right to pray near the Western Wall, at least on the 9th of Av. In 425 CE, the Jews of the Galilee wrote to Byzantine Empress Elia Eudocia seeking permission to pray by the ruins of the temple. Permission was granted and they were officially permitted to resettle in Jerusalem. Middle Ages 500-1500 Several Jewish authors of the 10th and 11th centuries write about the Jews resorting to the Western Wall for devotional purposes. Ahimaaz relates that Rabbi Samuel ben Paltiel 980-1010 gave money for oil at the sanctuary at the Western Wall. Benjamin of Tudela 1170 wrote, in front of this place is the Western Wall, which is one of the walls of the Holy of Holies. This is called the Gate of Mercy, and hither come all the Jews to pray before the wall in the open court. The account gave rise to confusion about the actual location of Jewish worship, and some suggest that Benjamin in fact referred to the Eastern Wall along with its Gate of Mercy, while Nachmanides, d. 1270, did not mention a synagogue near the Western Wall in his detailed account of the temple site. Shortly before the Crusader period, a synagogue existed at the site. Obadiah of Bertinaro, 1488, states the Western Wall, part of which is still standing, is made of great, thick stones, larger than any I have seen in buildings of antiquity in Rome or in other lands. Shortly after Saladin's 1187 siege of the city, in 1193, the Sultan's son and successor Al-Afdal established the land adjacent to the wall as a charitable trust. It was named after an important mystic Abu Madyan Shuaib and dedicated to Moroccan settlers who had taken up residence there. Houses were built only 4 meters, 13 feet, away from the wall. The first mention of the Islamic tradition that Buraq was tethered gathered at the site is from the 14th century. A manuscript by Ibn Firqa, d. 1328, refers to Bab al-Nab, lit. Gate of the Prophet, an old name for a gate along the southwestern wall of the Haram al-Sharif. Ottoman period 1517 to 1917 In 1517, the Turkish Ottomans conquered Jerusalem from the Mamluks who had held it since 1250, and various folktales relate Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent's quest to locate the temple site and his order to have the area swept and sprinkled, and the Western Wall washed with rose water upon its discovery. In the late 16th century, Suleiman ordered the construction of an imposing fortress wall to be built around the entire city, which still stands today. At the time, Jews received official permission to worship at the site, and Ottoman architect Mimar Sinan built an oratory for them there. In 1625, organized prayers at the wall are mentioned for the first time. Over the centuries, land close to the wall became built up. Public access to the wall was through the Moroccan Quarter, a labyrinth of narrow alleyways. In May 1840, a firman issued by Ibrahim Pasha forbade the Jews to pave the passageway in front of the wall. It also cautioned them against raising their voices and displaying their books there. They were, however, allowed to pay visits to it as of old. Rabbi Joseph Schwartz, writing in the mid-19th century records, "This wall is visited by all our brothers on every feast and festival, and the large space at its foot is often so densely filled up, that all cannot perform their devotions here at the same time. It is also visited, though by less numbers, on every Friday afternoon, and by some nearly every day. No one is molested in these visits by the Mohammedans, as we have a very old firman from the Sultan of Constantinople that the approach shall not be denied to us, though the Porte obtains for this privilege a special tax, which is, however, quite insignificant." Over time, the increased numbers of people gathering at the site resulted in tensions between the Jewish visitors who wanted easier access and more space, and the residents, who complained of the noise. This gave rise to Jewish attempts at gaining ownership of the land adjacent to the wall. In the late 1830s, a wealthy Jew named Shamaria Luria attempted to purchase houses near the wall, but was unsuccessful, as was Jewish sage Abdullah of Bombay, who tried to purchase the Western Wall in the 1850s. In 1869, Rabbi Hillel Moshe Gelbstein settled in Jerusalem. He arranged that benches and tables be brought to the wall on a daily basis for the study groups he organized and the minyan which he led there for years. He also formulated a plan whereby some of the courtyards facing the wall would be acquired, with the intention of establishing 3 synagogues, one each for the Sephardim, the Hasidim and the Parashim. He also endeavored to re-establish an ancient practice of guards of honor, which according to the Mishnah in Midot, were positioned around the Temple Mount. He rented a house near the wall and paid men to stand guard there and at various other gateways around the mount. However, this setup lasted only for a short time due to lack of funds or because of Arab resentment. In 1874, Mordecai Rosanna paid for the repaving of the alleyway adjacent to the wall. In 1887, Baron Rothschild conceived a plan to purchase and demolish the Moroccan Quarter as a merit and honor to the Jewish people. The proposed purchase was considered and approved by the Ottoman governor of Jerusalem, Rauf Pasha, and by the Mufti of Jerusalem, Muhammad Tahir Husseini. Even after permission was obtained from the highest secular and Muslim religious authority to proceed, the transaction was shelved after the authorities insisted that after demolishing the quarter no construction of any type could take place there, only trees could be planted to beautify the area. Additionally, the Jews would not have full control over the area. This meant that they would have no power to stop people from using the plaza for various activities, including the driving of mules, which would cause a disturbance to worshippers. Other reports place the scheme's failure on Jewish infighting as to whether the plan would foster a detrimental Arab reaction. In 1895, Hebrew linguist and publisher Rabbi Chaim Hershenson became entangled in a failed effort to purchase the Western Wall and lost all his assets. Even the attempts of the Palestine Land Development Company to purchase the environs of the Western Wall for the Jews just before the outbreak of World War I never came to fruition. In the first 2 months following the Ottoman Empire's entry into the First World War, the Turkish governor of Jerusalem, Zaki Bey, offered to sell the Moroccan Quarter, which consisted of about 25 houses, to the Jews in order to enlarge the area available to them for prayer. He requested a sum of £20,000 which would be used to both rehouse the Muslim families and to create a public garden in front of the wall. However, the Jews of the city lacked the necessary funds. A few months later, under Muslim-Arab pressure on the Turkish authorities in Jerusalem, Jews became forbidden by official decree to place benches and light candles at the wall. This sour turn in relations was taken up by the Chachambashi, who managed to get the ban overturned. In 1915, it was reported that Jamal Pasha closed off the wall to visitation as a sanitary measure. Firmans issued regarding the wall. These firmans were cited by the Jewish contingent at the International Commission, 1930, as proof for rights at the wall. Muslim authorities responded by arguing that historic sanctions of Jewish presence were acts of tolerance shown by Muslims, who, by doing so, did not concede any positive rights. British rule 1917-48 . In December 1917, British forces under Edmund Allenby captured Jerusalem from the Turks. In 1919, Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann approached the British military governor of Jerusalem, Colonel Sir Ronald Storrs, and offered between £75,000 and £100,000, approx. £5 million in modern terms, to purchase the area at the foot of the wall and rehouse the occupants. Storrs was enthusiastic about the idea because he hoped some of the money would be used to improve Muslim education. Although they appeared promising at first, negotiations broke down after strong Muslim opposition. Storrs wrote 2 decades later, the acceptance of the proposals, had it been practicable, would have obviated years of wretched humiliations, including the befoling of the wall and pavement and the unmannerly braying of the tragicomic Arab band during Jewish prayer, and culminating in the horrible outrages of 1929. In early 1920, the first Jewish-Arab dispute over the wall occurred when the Muslim authorities were carrying out minor repair works to the wall's upper courses. The Jews, while agreeing that the works were necessary, appealed to the British that they be made under supervision of the newly formed Department of Antiquities, because the wall was an ancient relic. In 1926, an effort was made to lease the Maghreb Waqf, which included the wall, with the plan of eventually buying it. Negotiations were begun in secret by the Jewish judge Gad Frumkin, with financial backing from American millionaire Nathan Strauss. The chairman of the Palestine Zionist Executive, Colonel F. H. Kish, explained that the aim was quietly to evacuate the Moroccan occupants of those houses which it would later be necessary to demolish to create an open space with seats for aged worshippers to sit on. However, Strauss withdrew when the price became excessive and the plan came to nothing. The Vaad Leumi, against the advice of the Palestine Zionist Executive, demanded that the British expropriate the wall and give it to the Jews, but the British refused. In 1928, the Zionist organization reported that John Chancellor, High Commissioner of Palestine, believed that the Western Wall should come under Jewish control and wondered why no great Jewish philanthropist had not bought it yet. September 1928 disturbances. In 1922, a status quo agreement issued by the Mandatory Authority forbade the placing of benches or chairs near the wall. The last occurrence of such a ban was in 1915, but the Ottoman decree was soon retracted after intervention of the Chachambashi. In 1928, the District Commissioner of Jerusalem, Edward Keith Roach, acceded to an Arab request to implement the ban. This led to a British officer being stationed at the wall making sure that Jews were prevented from sitting, nor were Jews permitted to separate the sexes with a screen. In practice, a flexible modus vivendi had emerged and such screens had been put up from time to time when large numbers of people gathered to pray. On September 24, 1928, the Day of Atonement, British police resorted to removing by force a screen used to separate men and women at prayer. Women who tried to prevent the screen being dismantled were beaten by the police, who used pieces of the broken wooden frame as clubs. Chairs were then pulled out from under elderly worshippers. The episode made international news and Jews the world over objected to the British action. Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, the chief rabbi of the ultra-Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem, issued a protest letter on behalf of his community, the Edahach Eritis, and Agudas Yisrael, strongly condemning the desecration of the holy site. Various communal leaders called for a general strike. A large rally was held in the Etz Chaim Yeshiva, following which an angry crowd attacked the local police station in which they believed Douglas Valder Duff, the British officer involved, was sheltering. Commissioner Edward Keith Roach described the screen as violating the Ottoman status quo that forbade Jews from making any construction in the Western Wall area. He informed the Jewish community that the removal had been carried out under his orders after receiving a complaint from the Supreme Muslim Council. The Arabs were concerned that the Jews were trying to extend their rights at the wall and with this move, ultimately intended to take possession of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The British government issued an announcement explaining the incident and blaming the Jewish beadle at the wall. It stressed that the removal of the screen was necessary, but expressed regret over the ensuing events. A widespread Arab campaign to protest against presumed Jewish intentions and designs to take possession of the Al-Aqsa Mosque swept the country, and a Society for the Protection of the Muslim Holy Places was established. The committee also demanded that the British administration expropriate the wall for the Jews. From October 1928 onward, Mufti Amin al-Husseini organized a series of measures to demonstrate the Iraq's exclusive claims to the Temple Mount and its environs. He ordered new construction next to and above the Western Wall. The British granted the Arabs permission to convert a building adjoining the wall into a mosque and to add a minaret. A muezzin was appointed to perform the Islamic call to prayer and Sufi rites directly next to the wall. These were seen as a provocation by the Jews who prayed at the wall. The Jews protested and tensions increased. A British inquiry into the disturbances and investigation regarding the principal issue in the Western Wall dispute, namely the rights of the Jewish worshippers to bring appurtenances to the wall, was convened. The Supreme Muslim Council provided documents dating from the Turkish regime supporting their claims. However, repeated reminders to the chief rabbinate to verify which apparatus had been permitted failed to elicit any response. They refused to do so, arguing that Jews had the right to pray at the wall without restrictions. A few months later, Haj Amin complained to Chancellor that Jews were bringing benches and tables in increased numbers to the wall and driving nails into the wall and hanging lamps on them. 1929 Palestine riots. In the summer of 1929, the Mufti Haj Amin al-Husina ordered an opening be made at the southern end of the alleyway which straddled the wall. The former cul-de-sac became a thoroughfare which led from the Temple Mount into the prayer area at the wall. Mules were herded through the narrow alley, often dropping excrement. This, together with other construction projects in the vicinity, and restricted access to the wall, resulted in Jewish protests to the British, who remained indifferent. On August 14, 1929, after attacks on individual Jews praying at the wall, 6,000 Jews demonstrated in Tel Aviv, shouting "The wall is ours." The next day, the Jewish fast of Tisha B'Av, 300 youths raised the Zionist flag and sang Hatikva at the wall. The day after, on August 16, an organized mob of 2,000 Muslim Arabs descended on the Western Wall, injuring the beadle and burning prayer books, liturgical fixtures and notes of supplication. The rioting spread to the Jewish commercial area of town, and was followed a few days later by the Hebron massacre. 133 Jews were killed and 339 injured in the Arab riots, and in the subsequent process of quelling the riots 110 Arabs were killed by British police. This was by far the deadliest attack on Jews during the period of British rule over Palestine. 1930 International Commission. In 1930, in response to the 1929 riots, the British government appointed a commission to determine the rights and claims of Muslims and Jews in connection with the Western Wailing Wall, and to determine the causes of the violence and prevent it in the future. The League of Nations approved the commission on condition that the members were not British. The Jews requested that the commission take the following actions: to give recognition to the immemorial claim that the Wailing Wall is a holy place for the Jews, not only for the Jews in Palestine, but also for the Jews of the whole world; to decree that the Jews shall have the right of access to the wall for devotion and for prayers in accordance with their ritual without interference or interruption; to decree that it shall be permissible to continue the Jewish services under the conditions of decency and decorum characteristic of a sacred custom that has been carried on for many centuries without infringement upon the religious rights of others; to decree that the drawing up of any regulations that may be necessary as to such devotions and prayers, shall be entrusted to the Rabbinate of Palestine, who shall thus reassume full responsibility in that matter, in discharge of which responsibility they may consult the Rabbinate of the world. The commission noted that the Jews do not claim any proprietorship to the wall or to the pavement in front of it. Concluding speech of Jewish Council, Minutes, page 908. David Yellin, head of the Hebrew Teachers Seminary, member of the Ottoman Parliament, and one of the first public figures to join the Zionist movement openly, testified before the commission. He stated, "Being judged before you today stands a nation that has been deprived of everything that is dear and sacred to it from its emergence in its own land, the graves of its patriarchs, the graves of its great kings, the graves of its holy prophets and, above all, the site of its glorious temple. Everything has been taken from it, and of all the witnesses to its sanctity, only one vestige remains, one side of a tiny portion of a wall, which, on one side, borders the place of its former temple. In front of this bare stone wall, that nation stands under the open sky, in the heat of summer and in the rains of winter, and pours out its heart to its God in heaven." The commission concluded that the wall, and the adjacent pavement and Moroccan quarter, were solely owned by the Muslim Waqf. However, Jews had the right to free access to the Western Wall for the purpose of devotions at all times, subject to some stipulations that limited which objects could be brought to the wall and forbade the blowing of the shofar, which was made illegal. Muslims were forbidden to disrupt Jewish devotions by driving animals or other means. Yitzchak Orenstein, who held the position of Rabbi of the Kotel, recorded in April 1930 that our master, Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, came to pray this morning by the Kosel, and one of those present produced a small chair for the aravi to rest on for a few moments. However, no sooner had the aravi sat down did an Arab officer appear and pull the chair away from under him. During the 1930s, at the conclusion of Yom Kippur, young Jews persistently flouted the shofar ban each year and blew the shofar, resulting in their arrest and prosecution. They were usually fined or sentenced to imprisonment for 3 to 6 months. The Shah Commission determined that the violence occurred due to racial animosity on the part of the Arabs, consequent upon the disappointment of their political and national aspirations and fear for their economic future. Jordanian Rule 1948-67 During the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the Old City together with the wall was controlled by Jordan. Article 8 of the 1949 Armistice Agreement provided for Israeli Jewish access to the Western Wall. However, for the following 19 years, despite numerous requests by Israeli officials and Jewish groups to the United Nations and other international bodies to attempt to enforce the Armistice Agreement, Jordan refused to abide by this clause. Neither Israeli Arabs nor Israeli Jews could visit their holy places in the Jordanian territories. An exception was made for Christians to participate in Christmas ceremonies in Bethlehem. Some sources claimed Jews could only visit the wall if they traveled through Jordan, which was not an option for Israelis, and did not have an Israeli visa stamped in their passports. Only Jordanian soldiers and tourists were to be found there. A vantage point on Mount Zion, from which the wall could be viewed, became the place where Jews gathered to pray. For thousands of pilgrims, the mount, being the closest location to the wall under Israeli control, became a substitute site for the traditional priestly blessing ceremony which takes place on the three pilgrimage festivals. Buraq Wailing Wall road sign. During the Jordanian rule of the Old City, a ceramic street sign in Arabic and English was affixed to the stones of the ancient wall, attached 2.1 meters, 6 feet 11 in, up. It was made up of 8 separate ceramic tiles and said Buraq Road in Arabic at the top with the English Buraq Wailing Wall road below. When Israeli soldiers arrived at the wall in June 1967, one attempted to scrawl Hebrew lettering on it. The Jerusalem Post reported that on June 8, Ben-Gurion went to the wall and looked with distaste at the road sign. "This is not right, it should come down," and he proceeded to dismantle it. This act signaled the climax of the capture of the Old City and the ability of Jews to once again access their holiest sites. Emotional recollections of this event are related by David Ben-Gurion and Shimon Peres. Israeli Rule 1967 present Following Israel's victory during the 1967 Six-Day War, the Western Wall came under Israeli control. Brigadier Rabbi Shlomo Goren proclaimed after its capture that Israel would never again relinquish the wall, a stance supported by Israeli Minister for Defense Moshe Dayan and Chief of Staff General Yitzhak Rabin. Rabin described the moment Israeli soldiers reached the wall. "There was one moment in the Six-Day War which symbolized the great victory. That was the moment in which the first paratroopers, under Ger's command, reached the stones of the Western Wall. Feeling the emotion of the place, there never was, and never will be, another moment like it. Nobody staged that moment. Nobody planned it in advance." 48 hours after capturing the wall, the military, without explicit government order, hastily proceeded to demolish the entire Moroccan quarter, which stood 4 meters, 13 feet, from the wall. The Sheikh Eid Mosque, which was built over one of Jerusalem's oldest Islamic schools, the Afdaliya, named after one of Saladin's sons, was pulled down to make way for the plaza. It was one of 3 or 4 that survived from Saladin's time. 650 people consisting of 106 Arab families were ordered to leave their homes at night. When they refused, bulldozers began to demolish the buildings with people still inside, killing 1 person and injuring a number of others. According to Eyal Weizman, Chaim Herzog, who later became Israel's 6th president, took much of the credit for the destruction of the neighborhood. "When we visited the Wailing Wall, we found a toilet attached to it. We decided to remove it, and from this we came to the conclusion that we could evacuate the entire area in front of the Wailing Wall, a historical opportunity that will never return. We knew that the following Saturday, Wednesday, June 14th, would be the Jewish festival of Shavuot and that many will want to come to pray. It all had to be completed by then." The narrow pavement, which could accommodate a maximum of 12,000 per day, was transformed into an enormous plaza that could hold in excess of 400,000. Several months later, the pavement close to the wall was excavated to a depth of 2.5 meters, exposing an additional 2 courses of large stones. A complex of buildings against the wall at the southern end of the plaza, that included Madrasa Fakhriya and the house that the Abu al-Saud family had occupied since the 16th century, were spared in the 1967 destruction, but demolished in 1969. The section of the wall dedicated to prayers was thus extended southwards to double its original length, from 28 to 60 meters, 92 to 197 feet, while the 4 meters, 13 feet, space facing the wall grew to 40 meters, 130 feet. The narrow, approximately 120 square meters, 1,300 square feet, Pre-1948 alley along the wall, used for Jewish prayer, was enlarged to 2,400 square meters, 26,000 square feet, with the entire Western Wall plaza covering 20,000 square meters, 4.9 acres, stretching from the wall to the Jewish quarter. The new plaza, created in 1967, is used for worship and public gatherings, including bar mitzvah celebrations and the swearing-in ceremonies of newly full-fledged soldiers in the Israel Defense Forces. Tens of thousands of Jews flock to the wall on the Jewish holidays, and particularly on the fast of Tisha B'Av, which marks the destruction of the Temple, and on Jerusalem Day, which commemorates the reunification of Jerusalem in 1967 and the delivery of the wall into Jewish hands. Conflicts over prayer at the National Monument began little more than a year after Israel's victory in the Six-Day War once again made site accessible to Jews. In July 1968, the World Union for Progressive Judaism, which had planned the group's international convention in Jerusalem, appealed to the Knesset after the Ministry of Religious Affairs prohibited the organization from hosting mixed-gender services at the wall. The Knesset Committee on Internal Affairs backed the Ministry of Religious Affairs in disallowing the Jewish convention attendees, who had come from over 24 countries, from worshipping in their fashion. The Orthodox hold that services at the wall should follow traditional Jewish law for segregated seating followed in synagogues, while the non-Orthodox perspective was that the wall is a shrine of all Jews, not one particular branch of Judaism. Robinson's Arch. At the southern end of the Western Wall, Robinson's Arch, along with a row of vaults, once supported stairs ascending from the street to the Temple Mount. The need for such an area became apparent when in 1989, after repeated attacks by Haredim, activists belonging to a group called Women of the Wall petitioned to secure the right of women to pray at the wall without restrictions. In a 2003 directive, Israel's Supreme Court disallowed any women from reading publicly from the Torah or wearing traditional prayer shawls at the plaza itself, but instructed the Israeli government to prepare the site of Robinson's Arch to host such events. The site was inaugurated in August 2004 and has since hosted services by reform and conservative groups, as well as services by the Women of the Wall. In May 2013, a judge ruled that the 2003 Israeli Supreme Court ruling prohibiting women from carrying a Torah or wearing prayer shawls had been misinterpreted, and that Women of the Wall prayer gatherings at the wall should not be deemed as disturbing the public order. In November 2010, the government approved a NIS 85 meters, $23 million scheme to improve access and infrastructure at the site. The Isaiah Stone, located under Robinson's Arch, has a carved inscription in Hebrew from Isaiah chapter 66 verse 14, "And when ye see this, your heart shall rejoice and your bones shall flourish like an herb." In April 2013, Jewish Agency for Israel leader Natan Sharansky spearheaded a concept that would expand and renovate the Robinson's Arch area into an area where people may perform worship rituals not based on the Orthodox interpretation of Jewish tradition. On August 25, 2013, a new 4,480 square foot prayer platform named Azaret Yisrael Plaza was completed as part of this plan, with access to the platform at all hours, even when the rest of the area's archaeological park is closed to visitors. After some controversy regarding the question of authority over this prayer area, the announcement was made that it would come under the authority of a future government-appointed pluralist council that would include non-Orthodox representatives. In January 2016, the Israeli cabinet approved a plan to designate a new space at the Kotel that would be available for egalitarian prayer and that would not be controlled by the rabbinate. Women of the Wall welcomed the decision, although Sephardic Chief Rabbi Shlomo Amar of Jerusalem said creating a mixed-gender prayer section was paramount to destroying it. The chief rabbinate said it would create an alternate plan. Wilson's Arch. In 2005, the Western Wall Heritage Foundation initiated a major renovation effort under Rabbi of the Wall Shmuel Rabinovich. Its goal was to renovate and restore the area within Wilson's Arch, the covered area to the left of worshippers facing the wall in the open prayer plaza, in order to increase access for visitors and for prayer. The restoration to the men's section included a Torah ark that can house over 100 Torah scrolls, in addition to new bookshelves, a library, heating for the winter, and air conditioning for the summer. A new room was also built for the scribes who maintain and preserve the Torah scrolls used at the wall. New construction also included a women's section, overlooking the men's prayer area, so that women could use this separate area to take part in the services held inside under the arch for the first time. On July 25, 2010, a Ner Tamid, an oil-burning eternal light, was installed within the prayer hall within Wilson's Arch, the first eternal light installed in the area of the Western Wall. A number of special worship events have been held since the renovation. They have taken advantage of the cover, temperature control, and enhanced security. However, in addition to the more recent programs, one early event occurred in September 1983, even before the modern renovation. At that time, U.S. 6th Fleet Chaplain Rabbi Arnold Resnikoff was allowed to hold an unusual interfaith service, the first first interfaith service ever conducted at the wall during the time it was under Israeli control. That included men and women sitting together. The 10-minute service included the priestly blessing, recited by Reznikov, who is a Cohen. A Ministry of Religion's representative was present, responding to press queries that the service was authorized as part of a special welcome for the U.S. Sixth Fleet. Rabbis of the Wall. After the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, Rabbi Yehuda Meir Getz was named the overseer of proceedings at the wall. After Rabbi Getz's death in 1995, Rabbi Shmuel Rabinowitz was given the position. Theology and ritual Judaism Rabbinic tradition teaches that the Western Wall was built upon foundations laid by the biblical King Solomon from the time of the First Temple. A midrash compiled in late antiquity refers to a western wall of the temple which would never be destroyed, and Lamentations Rabbah mentions how Rome was unable to topple the Western Wall due to the divine oath promising its eternal survival. Another midrash quotes a 4th century scholar, Aravi said that the divine presence has never departed from the Western Wall, and the Zohar similarly writes that the divine presence rests upon the Western Wall. Some medieval rabbis claimed that today's Western Wall is a surviving wall of the temple itself and cautioned Jews from approaching it, lest they enter the temple precincts in a state of impurity. Many contemporary rabbis believe that the rabbinic traditions were made in reference to the Temple Mount's Western Wall, which accordingly endows the wall with inherent holiness. Most secular scholars believe, however, that these traditions originally pertained to a Western Wall of the temple itself, and since the 1500s, were gradually applied to the surviving retaining Western Wall of the Mount. Rabbi Zvi Hirsch Kindenover discusses the mystical aspect of the Hebrew word kotel when discussing the significance of praying against a wall. He cites the Zohar, which writes that the word kotel, meaning wall, is made up of two parts: ko, which has the numerical value of God's name, and tel, meaning mount, which refers to the temple and its western wall. 18th century scholar Jonathan Abishutz writes that after the destruction of the temple, God removed his presence from his sanctuary and placed it upon the western wall, where it remains in its holiness and honor. It is told that great Jewish sages, including Isaac Luria and the Radvaz, experienced a revelation of the divine presence at the wall. Sanctity of the wall. Many contemporary Orthodox scholars rule that the area in front of the wall has the status of a synagogue and must be treated with due respect. This is the view upheld by the authority in charge of the wall. As such, men and married women are expected to cover their heads upon approaching the wall, and to dress appropriately. When departing, the custom is to walk backwards away from the wall. On Saturdays, it is forbidden to enter the area with electronic devices, including cameras, which infringe on the sanctity of the Sabbath. Some Orthodox Jewish codifiers warn against inserting fingers into the cracks of the wall, as they believe that the breadth of the wall constitutes part of the Temple Mount itself and retains holiness, while others who permit doing so claim that the wall is located outside the temple area. In the past, some visitors would write their names on the wall, or based upon various scriptural verses, would drive nails into the crevices. These practices stopped after rabbis determined that such actions compromised the sanctity of the wall. Another practice also existed whereby pilgrims or those intending to travel abroad would hack off a chip from the wall or take some of the sand from between its cracks as a good luck charm or memento. In the late 19th century, the question was raised as to whether this was permitted, and a long responsa appeared in the Jerusalem newspaper Havitzalet in 1898. It concluded that even if according to Jewish law it was permitted, the practices should be stopped as it constituted a desecration. More recently, the Yakut Yosef rules that it is forbidden to remove small chips of stone or dust from the wall, although it is permissible to take twigs from the vegetation which grows in the wall for an amulet, as they contain no holiness. Cleaning the stones is also problematic from a halachic point of view. Blasphemous graffiti once sprayed by a tourist was left visible for months until it began to peel away. There was once an old custom of removing one's shoes upon approaching the wall. A 17th century collection of special prayers to be said at holy places mentions that upon coming to the Western Wall one should remove his shoes, bow and recite. Rabbi Moses Riker wrote that it is a good and praiseworthy custom to approach the Western Wall in white garments after ablution, kneel and prostrate oneself in submission and recite, "This is nothing other than the house of God, and here is the gate of heaven." When within 4 cubits of the wall, one should remove their footwear. Over the years the custom of standing barefoot at the wall has ceased, as there is no need to remove one's shoes when standing by the wall, because the plaza area is outside the sanctified precinct of the Temple Mount. In Judaism, the Western Wall is venerated as the sole remnant of the Holy Temple. It has become a place of pilgrimage for Jews, as it is the closest permitted accessible site to the holiest spot in Judaism, namely the Even HaShedia or foundation stone, which lies on the Temple Mount. According to one rabbinic opinion, Jews may not set foot upon the Temple Mount, and doing so is a sin punishable by Karith, while almost all historians and archaeologists and some rabbinical authorities believe that the rocky outcrop in the dome of the rock is the foundation stone. Some rabbis say it is located directly opposite the exposed section of the Western Wall, near the El Kas fountain. This spot was the site of the Holy of Holies when the temple stood, mourning over the temple's destruction. According to Jewish law, one is obligated to grieve and rend one's garment upon visiting the Western Wall and seeing the desolate site of the temple. Some scholars write that rending one's garments is not applicable nowadays as Jerusalem is under Jewish control. Others disagree, pointing to the fact that the Temple Mount is controlled by the Muslim Waqf and that the mosques which sit upon the temple site should increase feelings of distress. If one hasn't seen the wall for over 30 days, the prevailing custom is to rend one's garments, but this can be avoided if one visits on the Sabbath or on festivals. According to Daniel Epstein, a person who has not seen the wall within the last 30 days should recite, "Our holy temple, which was our glory, in which our forefathers praised you, was burned and all of our delights were destroyed." Prayer at the wall. The sages of the Talmud stated that anyone who prays at the temple in Jerusalem, it is as if he has prayed before the throne of glory, because the gate of heaven is situated there and it is open to hear prayer. Jewish law stipulates that the silent prayer should be recited facing towards Jerusalem, the temple, and ultimately the Holy of Holies, as God's bounty and blessing emanates from that spot. It is generally believed that prayer by the Western Wall is particularly beneficial since it was that wall which was situated closest to the Holy of Holies. A well-known segule, efficacious remedy, for finding one's soulmate is to pray for 40 consecutive days at the Western Wall, a practice apparently conceived by Rabbi Yisroel Yaakov Fisher. The Scroll of Ahimaaz, a historical document written in 1050 CE, distinctly describes the Western Wall as a place of prayer for the Jews. In around 1167 CE, during the late Crusader period, Benjamin of Tudela wrote that in front of this place is the Western Wall, which is one of the walls of the Holy of Holies. This is called the Gate of Mercy, and hither come all the Jews to pray before the wall in the open court. In 1625, arranged prayers at the wall are mentioned for the first time by a scholar whose name has not been preserved. Scrolls of the law were brought to the wall on occasions of public distress and calamity, as testified to in a narrative written by Rabbi Gedaliah of Semitiza, who went to Jerusalem in 1699. The writings of various travelers in the Holy Land, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, tell of how the wall and its environs continued to be a place of devotion for the Jews. Isaac Yahuda, a prominent member of the Sephardic community in Jerusalem, recalled how men and women used to gather in a circle at the wall to hear sermons delivered in Ladino. His great-grandmother, who arrived in Palestine in 1841, used to go to the Western Wall every Friday afternoon, winter and summer, and stay there until candle lighting time, reading the entire book of Psalms and the Song of Songs. She would sit there by herself for hours. In the past, women could be found sitting at the entrance to the wall every Sabbath holding fragrant herbs and spices in order to enable worshippers to make additional blessings. In the hot weather, they would provide cool water. The women also used to cast lots for the privilege of sweeping and washing the alleyway at the foot of the wall. Throughout the ages, the wall is where Jews have gathered to express gratitude to God or to pray for divine mercy. On news of the Normandy landings on June 6, 1944, thousands of Jews went to the wall to offer prayers for the success of His Majesty's and Allied forces in the liberation of all enemy-occupied territory. On October 13, 1994, 50,000 gathered to pray for the safe return of kidnapped soldier Nachshon Waxman. August 10, 2005 saw a massive prayer rally at the wall. Estimates of people protesting Israel's unilateral disengagement plan ranged from 50,000 to 250,000 people. Every year on Tisha B'Av, large crowds congregate at the wall to commemorate the destruction of the temple. In 2007, over 100,000 gathered. During the month of Tishrei 2009, a record 1.5 million people visited the site. Egalitarian and non-Orthodox prayer. While during the late 19th century, no formal segregation of men and women was to be found at the wall, conflict erupted in July 1968 when members of the World Union for Progressive Judaism were denied the right to host a mixed-gender service at the site after the Ministry of Religious Affairs insisted on maintaining the gender segregation customary at Orthodox places of worship. The progressives responded by claiming that the wall is a shrine of all Jews, not one particular branch of Judaism. In 1988, the small but vocal women of the wall launched a campaign for recognition of non-Orthodox prayer at the wall. Their form and manner of prayer elicited a violent response from some some Orthodox worshippers, and they were subsequently banned from holding services at the site. In response to the repeated arrest of women, including Annette Hoffman found flouting the law, the Jewish Agency observed the urgent need to reach a permanent solution and make the Western Wall once again a symbol of unity among the Jewish people, and not one of discord and strife. Some commentators called for the closure of the site unless an acceptable solution to the controversy was found. In 2003, Israel's Supreme Court upheld the ban on non-Orthodox worship at the wall, and the government responded by allocating Robinson's Arch for such purposes. This led to the expansion and renovation of the Robinson's Arch prayer area, which would be placed under the authority of a pluralist council. In August 2013, a platform named Azaret Yisrael Plaza was completed to facilitate non-Orthodox worship. Prayer notes. There is a much publicized practice of placing slips of paper containing written prayers into the crevices of the wall. The earliest account of this practice is attributed to Rabbi Chaim ibn Ader, d. 1743. More than 1 million notes are placed each year, and the opportunity to email notes is offered by a number of organizations. It has become customary for visiting dignitaries to place notes to tefillin. Shortly after the Western Wall came under Israeli control in 1967, a tefillin stand was erected with permission from Rabbi Yehuda Meir Getz, the first rabbi of the Kotel. The stand offers visitors the chance to put on tefillin, a daily Jewish ritual. In the months following the Six-Day War, an estimated 400,000 Jews observed this ritual at the stand. The stand is staffed by multilingual volunteers, and an estimated 100,000 visitors put on tefillin there annually. Islam Islamic reverence for the site is derived from the belief that the Prophet Muhammad tied his miraculous steed Buraq nearby during his night journey to Jerusalem. Various places have been suggested for the exact spot where Buraq was tethered, but for several centuries the preferred location has been the Al-Buraq Mosque, which is just inside the wall at the south end of the present Western Wall Plaza. The mosque is located above an ancient passageway, which once came out through the long-sealed Barclays Gate, whose huge lintel is still visible directly below the Maghreb Gate. When a British Jew asked the Egyptian authorities in 1840 for permission to repave the ground in front of the Western Wall, the governor of Syria wrote, "It is evident from the copy of the record of the deliberations of the Consultative Council in Jerusalem that the place the Jews asked for permission to pave adjoins the wall of the Haram al-Sharif and also the spot where al-Buraq was tethered, and is included in the endowment charter of Abu Madian, may God bless his memory, that the Jews never carried out any repairs in that place in the past. Therefore the Jews must not be enabled to pave the place." Karl Sandrechka, who was charged with compiling a list of place names for Charles Wilson's Ordnance Survey of Jerusalem in 1865, reported that the street leading to the Western Wall, including the part alongside the wall, belonged to the Hosh, court, enclosure, of al-Buraq, not Obrake, nor Obrate. In 1866, the Prussian consul and Orientalist Georg Rosen wrote that the Arabs call Obrake the entire length of the wall at the wailing place of the Jews, southwards down to the house of Abu Suud and northwards up to the substructure of the Mechkim Sharia court. Obrake is not, as was formerly claimed, a corruption of the word Ibri, Hebrews, but simply the Neo-Arabic pronunciation of Buraq, which, whilst Muhammad was at prayer at the Holy Rock, is said to have been tethered by him inside the wall location mentioned above. The name Hosh al-Buraq appeared on the maps of Wilson's 1865 survey, its revised editions of 1876 and 1900, and other maps in the early 20th century. In 1922, it was the street name specified by the official pro-Jerusalem Council. Christianity . Some scholars believe that when Jerusalem came under Christian rule in the 4th century, there was a purposeful transference of respect for the Temple Mount and the Western Wall in terms of sanctity to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, while the sites around the Temple Mount became a refuse dump for Christians. However, the actions of many modern Christian leaders, including Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI, who visited the wall and left prayer messages in its crevices, have symbolized for many Christians a restoration of respect and even veneration for this ancient religious site. Views Jewish Most Jews, religious and secular, consider the wall to be important to the Jewish people since it was originally built to hold the Second Temple. They consider the capture of the wall by Israel in 1967 as a historic event since it restored Jewish access to the site after a 19-year gap. There are, however, some Haredi Jews who hold different views. In 1994, Shlomo Goren wrote that the tradition of the wall as a Jewish prayer site was only 300 years old, the Jews being compelled to pray there after being forbidden to assemble on the mount itself. Israeli A poll carried out in 2007 by the Jerusalem Institute for Israel Studies indicated that 96% of Israeli Jews were against Israel relinquishing the Western Wall. During a speech at Israel's Merkaz Harav Yeshiva on Jerusalem Day in 2009, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared, "The flag that flies over the Kotel is the Israeli flag. Our holy places, the Temple Mount, will remain under Israeli sovereignty forever." Muslim In December 1973, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia stated that only Muslims and Christians have holy places and rights in Jerusalem. The Jews, he maintained, had no rights there at all. As for the Western Wall, he said, another wall can be built for them. They can pray against that. Raed Salah, leader of the northern branch of the Islamic movement in Israel, wrote that the Western Wall, all its various parts, structures and gates, are an inseparable part of the Al-Aqsa compound. The Western Wall is part of Al-Aqsa's Western Tower, which the Israeli establishment fallaciously and sneakily calls the Wailing Wall. The wall is part of the Holy Al-Aqsa Mosque. Palestinian According to the Palestinian National Authority, the Jews did not consider the wall as a place for worship except after the Balfour Declaration was issued in 1917. appointed Mufti of Jerusalem, Sheikh Ekrima Said Sabra, believes that the wall belongs to the Muslims alone. In 2000 he related that no stone of the Buraq Wall has any relation to Judaism. The Jews began praying at this wall only in the 19th century, when they began to develop national aspirations. A year later he stated, "There is not a single stone in the Wailing Wall relating to Jewish history. The Jews cannot legitimately claim this wall, neither religiously nor historically." The Committee of the League of Nations recommended in 1930, to allow the Jews to pray there, in order to keep them quiet, but by no means did it acknowledge that the wall belongs to them. In 2006, Dr. Hassan Kader, founder of the Al-Quds Encyclopedia, told PA Television that the first connection of the Jews to the wall is a recent one, which began in the 16th century, not ancient, like the roots of the Islamic connection. In November 2010, an official paper published by the PA Ministry of Information denied Jewish rights to the wall. It stated that Buraq Wall is in fact the Western Wall of Al-Aqsa Mosque and that Jews had only started using the site for worship after the 1917 Balfour Declaration. Yitzhak Reiter writes that the Islamization and de-Judaization of the Western Wall are a recurrent motif in publications and public statements by the heads of the Islamic movement in Israel. American While recognizing the difficulties inherent in any ultimate peace agreement that involves the status of Jerusalem, the official position of the United States includes a recognition of the importance of the wall to the Jewish people, and has condemned statements that seek to delegitimize the relationship between Jews and the area in general, and the Western Wall in particular. For example, in November 2010, the Obama administration strongly condemned a Palestinian official's claim that the Western Wall in the Old City has no religious significance for Jews and is actually Muslim property. The U.S. State Department noted that the United States rejects such a claim as factually incorrect, insensitive and highly provocative. See also List of artifacts in biblical archaeology. Pro-Wailing Wall Committee. Walls of Jerusalem. Southern Wall. Western Stone. Western Wall Camera. Western Wall Tunnel. Murabi Bridge. Footnotes. References.